when darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, when brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. Oh, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name, power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
God of our fathers. God of our fathers, whose almighty hand leads forth in beauty all the starry band of shining worlds in splendor through the sky.
Bibles, please, to the book of Joshua in the 4th chapter. Joshua chapter 4. We are going to read not the whole chapter, but a goodly portion of it. Every year I do try to find something that can cause us to think about Memorial Day in a new light. And I have chosen this passage here for reasons that will become apparent as I am able to deliver it. It's a passage in which we're actually going to find a couple of memorials, okay? And I think each of those two memorials that we find stands to open up our eyes as we can look in two different directions. We can look amongst ourselves into the world of men, and yet at the same time what is ultimately most important at all to any people anywhere is that they look to God, and that they have in their hearts and minds the realization that God and God alone is one that is empowered to know all things and judge all things, and that with perfect justice, so that if we have a cause or anybody has a cause, and if it be just, the power to uphold it, the right to confer what is actually called for, it's not within our power. And yet we need not despair, because even though we are forgetful, there is one whose memory is perfect, and his justice will come. It will come a day when it is true. And I think that we're going to be reminded of a couple of different things as we study these two memorials. Joshua chapter 4, I'll begin reading at the first verse. And it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spoke unto Joshua, saying, Take you 12 men out of the people, out of every man a tribe, and command ye them, saying, Take you up hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's feet stood firm, 12 stones. You shall carry them with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared of the children of Israel, out of every tribe a man. And Joshua said unto them, Pass over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of Jordan, and take you up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What mean ye by these stones? Then you shall answer them, that the waters of the Jordan were cut off from before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it passed over Jordan. The waters of Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel, they did so as Joshua commanded, and they took up 12 stones out of the midst of Jordan, as the Lord had spoken and commanded Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. And they carried them over with them unto the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the ark of the covenant stood. And they are there unto this day. Drop down, if you will, please, to verse number 15. Verse number 15. And the Lord spoke unto Joshua, saying, Command the priests that bear the ark of the testimony, that they come up out of Jordan. And Joshua therefore commanded the priests, saying, Come ye up out of Jordan. And it came to pass that when the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord were come up out of the midst of Jordan, and the soles of the priests were lifted up onto the dry land, that the waters of Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all of his banks as they did before. And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal, in the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of Jordan did Joshua pitch there in Gilgal. And he spoke unto the children of Israel, saying, when your children shall ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean ye by these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying that Israel came over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of Jordan from before you, until you were passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up from before us until we were gone over. And that all the people of the earth, they might know that the hand of the Lord that is mighty, that ye might fear the Lord your God forever. Now, I'm not really sure how long the Lord was obliged to hold back the floodwaters of the Jordan River. But it wouldn't have been, it would have taken some time, because it was no small number of people that forded the river Jordan. If you count all the men and all the women and all the children that were crossing over, it was up in the millions, and it would have been quite a project. And so you can imagine that quite a ways back beyond their sight, God would have dammed up the river, and it would have become, this creeping mountain, this hillock that would grow. For the waters were flowing, but they weren't going beyond the commandment of the Lord. And Israel was able to go across dry land in a miraculous thing, something that only God could do. And, even after all of Israel got across, there was still the commandment of the Lord that had to be obeyed. God had told Joshua, and you can read about it in chapter 3, which I didn't. Ahead of time, he had the notion that he was to select these 12 men, because it was commanded that they were to go in the midst of the Jordan, look around in the area where the priests had been standing, fetch them out of Jordan, 12 rocks on their heads, and they were going to take them to their lodging place, where they would camp that first night in the promised land. There they would set up a memorial. It's actually referred to as a memorial, I believe, in verse number 7. But they would set it up there, and then they did that. And then for some, kind of mysterious reason, after the 12 men had gotten their rocks up to a safe and secure location a little ways back from the edge of the river, which is about to be rampaged, Joshua himself, on his own initiative, because this was not commanded of the Lord, he set up a memorial that you might think would be kind of, like pointless and useless. It was about to be buried in the profoundest obscurity, and you might wonder if it's an exercise in vanity, for what kind of a memorial is it that isn't even to be seen? It was a memorial that would be sunk under the flowing depth of Jordan, where only the eye of an omniscient God could trace it. And he said, it is still there to this day. And I believe, it's still there to this day. It's sunk deep in the mire of ancient history. But you know what? He put it where it could not be meddled with or tampered with by men. Men would not see it. And you say, why? Well, you see, the memorial that men were to look to was the one that God commanded them in Gilgal. There at their very first lodging place, they set up a memorial, and it was to be a reminder that you go right over there from Gilgal. You go over there, you're going to find the Jordan River. And let me tell you, child, the story of how we as a nation had to cross that river. But then Joshua, before he left that river, he said, you know what? There's another memorial that I feel the need to put down there, just because no one will see it but the one who matters most. And I think he kind of like set that up there as kind of like a physical witness to the covenant promises of God God doesn't need a reminder. God doesn't need a memorial. Sometimes he does, though, right? I mean, he put the bow in the cloud so that he might see the bow in the cloud and remember his covenant promises. And I think Joshua, almost in the same spirit of that, says, all right, there's going to be a memorial here that, as far as human beings are concerned, is absolutely pointless because they couldn't even see it. But that's all right. They can't see it. They can't molest it. It's going to stay sunk where it is and will be there forever in the eye of an omniscient God. I'm setting it up, Lord, before you and you alone, because Israel nor any other person has any hope but the hope that you can bring them. Now, I want to talk first of all and most of all about the Gilgal Memorial, because that is the one that God commanded Joshua, and it was the one that they sent up later that night in the camp. They took stones out of Jordan and set it up where they pitched camp. And I want to ask and answer from the passage we just read, what are the good purposes for the which memorials are actually passed before men? And there are a lot of good. First of all, can I honestly say that since the Lord commanded it, he commanded Joshua to do that his very command, it carries a moral authority. God made it morally imperative that they do this thing, and because it was for their good, and it's not the only time that God has done so. You know, the Passover is a memorial service, right? They were to observe the Passover annually. We have the Lord's Supper. That is a memorial service too. Both of these, Israel looked forward to the coming of the Lamb of God who should take away the sin of the world. We, in the Lord's Supper, we look back upon the Lamb of God who, in point of fact, did suffer, die, and take away our own sin. And we don't do that annually. We are to do that as often as we will, and for the same reason. They say that the Passover is the longest continuous memorial in the history of mankind, that nothing really as a continued ongoing memorial in the world today goes back further. And it was absolutely necessary because here's the first reason I want to share with you. God commanded, we need memorials. We need memorials because we are tragically prone to forget what we ought never to forget. I mean, the very word memorial, like Memorial Day, I want you to set these 12 rocks up for a memorial. What does that speak of? It speaks to the fact that we have weak memories and we need aids to look out on, so that things that are so important that we imperil ourselves if we forget them, that we might have a reminder. God, he did endow us with minds that can understand, learn, accumulate important, vital knowledge, so that we don't have to be condemned to repeat the lessons of history. We just have to choose not to forget them. But since we know as a point of historic fact that men are constantly forgetting the lessons of history, we find that they get repeated often and often again. The book of Judges sets that forth, right? There was in the book of Judges, we'll call it a recurring pattern whereby Israel, they would get doing some things and then they would just kind of lose sight of the Lord their God. They would forget what they owed the Lord their God. And when they forgot the Lord their God and they got independent, they then got under bondage until God rescued them. He'd sent a judge. He'd send a deliverer. The deliverer would bring them back to a place where they were brought to acknowledge once again, you need the Lord. You can't get by without him. You begin to, you put the Lord out of your life, you're done for. That's a suicide for a nation to turn apart from God. Paul, also in Romans, he describes a cycle of apostasy that the nations of this world have chronically reverted to time and again. Historians like Toynbee and Spangler, they've studied history and they see these chronic patterns. They see this cycle and they've explained it in various ways. But the thing is, when men all of a sudden they let go of certain truths that they ought never to let go of, the same thing happens all over again. And Paul points out that it's not just mental weakness. If you read Romans chapter 1, verses 18 down to 32 very carefully, he says it has much to do with moral waywardness, that there is a kind of an intentional forgetting that goes about amongst men, that they do not like to desire to retain God in their knowledge. They forget certain things on purpose because it disagrees with their chosen lifestyle. And so they become ignorant of their own accord. And that happens, it's still happening. As a matter of fact, if you look inside of your bulletin, I tucked a 2-part insert in there. I'm not going to read the part about Russia, but you'll look at the top of one that's in italicized print, and it'll say President Abraham Lincoln. I want you to grab that little half sheet of paper and turn to the side that has an American warning from an American president. At your own time, I'll let you read what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said in a very related theme. But this is what Lincoln said during one of our gravest hours, the Civil War. He called for a day of national prayer, humiliation, and fasting. Quote, "We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven," he said. "We have been preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown, but we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves us then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness." As a further warning, you may, when you, on your own time, take a look at what Solzhenitsyn wrote when, under the influence of the communist revolution, the Bolsheviks, they had Marxist ideas. They were officially atheistic and wanted to establish, and did establish, an officially atheistic state in the world. And he talks about not just the forgetting of God, but the deliberate, intentional exclusion of God, and how it led to a revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of their people. And you compare the things, and it's we do forget. Can I point out something quite obvious? That there is in this room right now, some of you that are here, that when you were young, when you were young and in your childhood, there was a sense of moral outrage that caused a global outcry. Never again! Never again! And what caused that? Well, that was because some of you may be able to go back and actually recapture those memories. It was because it came to public light, all the atrocities of the Holocaust, what had happened. And it was the kind of thing that it wasn't generally known, at least not by all the people in all society. Some people knew. Others did not know. But when it came, this cry went up, never again, never again. They, in order to enforce that, began to build globally all kinds of memorials. There's some not far from us. We've taken our kids to the one down there in Dayton, Ohio, at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. You can go in there. You can actually go to Germany, and they've actually preserved some of the concentration camps intact. They didn't destroy them. They turned them into memorials to let them serve as warnings to the people. Nowadays, there's a radicalized young generation that wants to destroy and tear down memorials and monuments if they disagree with them. But not so there. People thought, you know what, sometimes you leave things intact because it bears a witness and a warning to succeeding generations and posterity that, there are things that are wrong. And they need to be aware of how weak we are and how prone we are to stumble. And you can go to these memorials and you can see piles of shoes and ghastly pictures. And yet, can I tell you something? Anti-Semitism is surging in the world today, and Holocaust denial is being promoted through popularized culture. And we are in a process of intentional forgetting of things that my grandparents, they were so shook into the core of their heart that they would have been amongst those. My grandpa Dawson actually fought in World War II. And I can imagine that man being one of them that said, never again. This is something we can't forget. I'm his grandkid. I'm older now, but I'm looking around and I'm thinking, Grandpa Dawson, you'd be rolling over in your grave. But they're beginning to forget, and they're forgetting on purpose. And the value of memorials placed in a place like Gilgal for us, it's simply for that. It's so that we have a physical, visual reminder. Matter of fact, this is what I put. Memorials, they are culturally significant because they are visible prompts which give occasion to teaching future generations vital lessons that we were taught providentially in our walk before the Lord. Right? There are some things that are so important that we need to keep them within the national conscience. And it is a crime and a sin to expunge them. I don't know if any of you have actually visited Arlington. You just saw imagery there on the screen. I actually have stood in that particular cemetery. And can I tell you that to stand there and to look out on those endless rows of white marble slabs there, it is moving. You can't really stand there. We visited the tomb of the unknown soldier, and it's moving. I think that you should take your kids deliberately to these kinds of places. If you were to actually visit in Oxford, England, on what they call Broad Street, and it's a very busy street, and it goes through the campus area of Oxford University. And people are driving up that all the time, and there is embedded in the asphalt of the road, the concrete of the road, there is a cross, and that cross is surrounded by a bunch of cobblestone rocks, and it's kind of a very obvious thing, and it's sitting there, and it's right in the middle of the road. And people driving over it all the time. I guess they probably, the locals may not even pay much attention to it. Now, there it is. But if you were to come by as a visitor, you've never really been to Oxford, England, and you say, what was that cross doing embedded in the road? And if there happened to be a local standing by that understood the significance of it being there, you said, oh, that? You want to know what that is? That's the marker of the exact location where Bishops Latimer and Ridley and Cranmer were burned alive at the stake for their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. We have, over the years, we've had different things there to memorialize this spot. And in our modern world, roads came in and buildings and everything. How could we preserve it? We had one option left to mark the exact spot that our forefathers had marked out for us so that all posterity can think. And because, people, they ask, what does that cross mean? You tell them, you mean that there were 3 men and they were immolated alive for their faith in Jesus Christ? Yeah, right there. Right there. We are living in a day, as I've already mentioned, where people are determined to eliminate anything that they disagree with. I wouldn't do that. People, listen, I don't particularly put any token trust in like the Georgia Guidestones. That's something they sent up down there in Georgia. And to me, it's a monument, all right? It's a monument to the growing humanistic folly of our secularized world, what they're trying to do there. But I tell you what, I would not go and tear the Georgia Guidestones down simply because I'm not a believer in that. It may disagree with my opinion, but it's a piece of real actual history, and it records what people in our day actually thought. And someday, history, providence itself, will manifest the deceptions and the truth, even of this era. And in that time, a people that look back with a refreshed and renewed understanding will be able to say, look at those stones they set up. That is a monument to how totally deceived people can get when they try to do civilization apart from God himself. So memorials they're to promote regular times of reflection on vital issues that we are to celebrate annually. I'm not going to go into that because I want to just quickly visit my last point here. I want to turn our thoughts in closing to that memorial that, well, it wasn't commanded by God, and it was kind of unnecessary because it was secondary. There all was a visible memorial set up in Gilgal, and this would have seemed to be an exercise in pure futility because once that watershed of built-up mountain of waters was finally released, and it came crashing with unimaginable thunder and violence along the shores, and the children of Israel just stood there and in awe, and they watched everything overflow the banks and just stood there. Wow! God held all that stuff back. And I don't suppose any of them ever saw that memorial again. But I do not believe that it was there for them. The most important witness to human history as it flows on like a long, endless river is the Lord God Almighty. You know, we see a little bit, just a tiny little segment of the river of human history, the little segment in which we were caught and swirling in the eddies of the time in which we lived. And we don't even see that little part of human history very well. You know, we see it tainted with prejudices and misinformation and all kinds of stuff. And yet there are causes in this world. There has been evil that ran amok. There have been people that suffered and were deprived of privileges of life itself. There were wars that were waged. And there has to be an accountability. And if you were to ask me, you know, if you could go to these soldiers, you know, as their blood pumped out where they lay on Omaha Beach or, you know, Verdun, wherever it was that they happened to be in, and if you could just in that moment ask them, if you could penetrate their mind to think, how would they want to be remembered, or in what way would they want to be remembered? I think that in that moment, the thing that they would want to be remembered, they would want to be remembered by God. They would want to be remembered by power. They would want to be remembered by the one and the only one that can bring justice. Let's just be honest, okay? You can plant flowers on a soldier's grave, but you cannot make that soldier spring to life again. You may light a candle in a vigil, but you cannot set the gleam of life in a fallen soldier's eye. You may try to remember a man, but you have no power to vindicate a man's life or reward him for it. You can chisel a man's name in a monument. We took our kids up to Lansing, too. That's another memorial. They have a Vietnam memorial. They also have a memorial up there for fallen police officers and policemen and stuff like that. And you can take your finger, okay, and you can put it right in the etched in granite and trace that name of people that died. Well, you can do that, but you cannot reunite that person with their loved ones. You see, if we turn a blind eye to God on Memorial Day, we turn a blind eye. We're totally out of sync with the soldiers who lost their lives and realized that, you know what? In order for their life to now, in order for them to have the satisfaction of justice, to know that it was not in vain, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing you can do. Yes, we should go to the memorials that are out there in the world. We should do that because it's good for us, because we need the reminder so we do not forget. But where is our hope? Our hope is not in anything that we can do. Our hope is in God. And I think that must have been what was in Joshua's heart when he put this ridiculous underwater monument that only the omniscient eye can see. And it is still there, he said, to this day. And I'm still there to this day. It is buried deep under centuries of muck and mire. And yet, can I tell you, those stones can be seen by the one being who sees all things, the whole flow of human history, and has power and goodness in his heart to do something about it. So this Memorial Day, if I can give you a word of advice, go see a physical memorial. Think a little bit. Read a book about a fallen soldier. Or go talk. We have veterans here. I didn't introduce them today. I think you guys know who they all are. But in addition, remember what Lincoln said. Remember what Solzhenitsyn on the back of that pointed out, that the most important thing in any nation to remember, if there's one thing we have to remember, it is that God is our trust. And this be our motto, in God we will trust. Well, if that was our motto, we would be doing a whole lot better than what we are today. Let's pray.